Now, if you're a student, how many times in school have you heard a prof say that the material in the New Testament books is nothing more than legend or myth? Well, again, that's just not true. Dr. Habermas gives 3 reasons why scholars believe that they are dealing with solid historical evidence about Jesus' life. Listen.
Now, I think we need to back up perhaps just a little bit and see what the significance of this 1 Corinthians 15 passage is. If Paul is given this material, 35-ish AD, on a trip to Jerusalem, Galatians 1:18, where he visits with Peter and James, the brother of Jesus, we've got hands-on material from a very early period that emphasizes 2 very important facts. Number 1, this material is early. And you don't know how early until you've worked with other Greco-Roman passages. I mean, Livy reports things that are hundreds of years before his time. And Paul's talking about something that he participated in 5 years after the event. And other people had it before he did. So, I mean, we're cutting down the gap here tremendously. Secondly, we have an eyewitness account here. This is one way to go after eyewitnesses. We talked about the Gospels, and that's one possibility. But going after Paul is really taking what is given to us, what the critics will give us. And Paul himself was an eyewitness. Let's not miss the forest for the trees. Paul said, I met the risen Jesus. But you've also got Peter. You've got James, the brother of Jesus. Both of them, by the way, have appearances in Paul's list in 1 Corinthians 15. One more little connection between Galatians 1, 1 Corinthians 15. So we're dealing with people here who were there. And I think Paul was interested in talking to Peter and seeing what he had to say. Now, back to this question, does Paul make this up himself? And I said no, because this is of first importance, and yet he got it from somebody else. Another way to go after this whole picture and do the same thing is to look at the early creedal passages in Acts. If you'd ask an evangelical, what does early preaching look like before we have a New Testament? They say, simple, read the book of Acts. If you ask some critics, they'll say, hey, read Acts 1 through 5. Now, the answer sounds the same, but it's for different reasons. Evangelicals say that because they trust the whole text. Critics find a number of these early confessional or traditional or creedal passages in Acts. And the one reason they find them, another evidence that something's a creed, is they believe that the shorter, more compact, unevolved the theology it is, the more authentic it is. And so in a certain scene there in Acts where Peter says, you can almost picture him pointing at the Jewish leaders, you killed him. God raised him from the dead. Now see, there's a little tiny piece that you get the gospel, right? Talking about the Lord Jesus. He's not just a man. You killed him. God raised him. You got the gospel. And Peter's in and out. And that's something that's easy to remember. How about we ought to obey God rather than man? Now that's not the gospel, but that's another one of those little pithy little sayings. And we have those in Acts 1 through 5. Acts 10, Peter's preaching to Cornelius. And all of those are Petrine. Acts 1 through 5. Acts 10. And in Acts 13, Paul's sermon, scholars also believe that there's some creedal passages there. And go back and find any of these, and let me tell you what you're going to find. In every little encapsulation of the gospel, you find the deity of Christ, his death, his resurrection. But guess what? Nobody would say Paul's the author. So here you have an encapsulation of early preaching. Paul's not even on the scene in Acts until 9. You've got 5 chapters there with early material. They're saying some of the same things. Paul's not around, and we could still go to Acts and say this is of first importance, how that Jesus died, he was raised, and more than being Jesus, he is Lord and he's Christ. Those are the 2 most popular titles. So go at it from the angle of Acts. You still see creeds. You still see this unevolved, short, concise, succinct theological statement that we see the gospel, that we call the gospel. Paul's not even there. So here's another whole look at what we call the central doctrine, the center of the Christian core, and that is the gospel, salvation.